Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. We are continuing on our series of how to play Global War 1936 to 1945, and this is the turn phase as part of that. We've already done the first phase, which was production, the second phase, which was combat movement, the third phase was combat, and there was a bunch of videos on that because we broke it up for the different parts of combat. Now this is the fourth phase, and there are 5 phases, but this is the fourth one, so we're almost done here. And this is going to be a short one, this video. This is called non-combat movement. And there's not much to this. Let me just read to you what non-combat movement is defined as. It says, during non-combat movement, you may move all of your units that did not move during combat movement, as well as return aircraft from combat and combat air patrol, even if they were placed on patrol during combat movement. Units moving in non-combat movement may not move into zones that were captured or conquered this turn, except as indicated in the next part, which I'm going to show you. So, what that means is that, if you've been following along with the home game, you know that the France came in here and they took this, and then they blitzed over here with this, and they flew in a guy on a transport, on an air transport. And so now we could not, like, say if these guys were here, and they're not, but if they were here, they couldn't move into here on non-combat movement because we just took that over this turn. So you're not allowed to move in there. So we need to we need to fly that plane back, right? We need to fly him to a safe landing zone, a friendly landing zone. And we can go to our own zone, or we can go to a zone with a nation that we are aligned with. And like, say if we were aligned with the UK right now, we could land him. He's already gone 2 spaces. We could land him as far away as Egypt here, or we could land him down here. Or we could probably do what we want to do and land him this way. We could go this way. Or we could come down, let me see, we're here. We could come down and land him down here. And then these guys weren't allowed to move because they had no combat movement. There was no way they could have got into combat from where they were. We could move these guys up here. Now we could continue with the tank and move him 2 spaces, but you see we've got some Italians up here, and they're sneaky bastards, right? So these guys could attack our tank. So we're gonna go like that. We're gonna keep them together, even though he can move further. He's choosing not to move further. So these guys are gonna go down and go and hunt down those Italians, and maybe we'll bring these guys down as well, right? Okay, so then these other things have already moved. You can't move any of these things because they were all involved in combat. And these things here, these were involved in combat as well. Like this transport plane, he was the one that flew this airborne guy in here. And then he stuck around for 1 round of combat, and then it was time for him to leave. Like, you're supposed to leave after 1 round of combat. And this strategic bomber here, he went in and carpet bombed this same place here. And then after his carpet bombing was done and that round of combat was over, then he was supposed to fly away, and he did. So he went up there. And then we had an amphibious assault that went up to Rome there, and that was successful. And the Roman, or the Italians, lost their money, and they're pretty sad now. But so we can't move any of those units, but we do have to move the planes. So for instance, we have a tactical bomber, and he flew 2 spaces, so he could go 2 more spaces. We're just going to land him down here on this carrier. That's actually where he came from. He flew from down here from that carrier and up there, and then the carrier moved up. And then these planes here, they were at an air base down here in northern Algeria, so they've got 1, 2, 3 spaces. Now they can move 2 spaces. But before we land him, let's just talk about that second that thing that I mentioned earlier when I said except as indicated in the next part. Now the next part, it gives us a, here, I'm just looking for a place to set this down. The next part gives us a optional rule that we can use. And I hadn't heard of this one. I hadn't. I must have glossed over it when I was playing my game there. But it's an interesting rule. And what it says is a unit capable of naval transport may land units in non-combat movement at a naval base captured this turn. Any aircraft may land in non-combat movement at an air base captured this turn. So this is called reinforcement of captured bases, and this is an optional rule. You can choose to play this rule or choose not to play this rule. As with all optional rules, this is something that you would need to discuss with the other players before the game begins and say, hey, do you want to play with this rule or not? And if everybody's unsure what it is, then you would explain it to them. So it's just air bases and naval bases, and that would include shipyards and submarine bases, obviously, as well, right? So it's just saying that these would be the only territories in which you could move units into after combat. So you could put land units only on a transport. You couldn't walk land units to a naval base, but you could non-combat move land units amphibiously on a naval transport to a naval base to reinforce it, or you could land aircraft at an air base that you captured. And they just captured this space right here. This is Turin, and there are 2 aircraft on there. So what they're saying is, if you play this optional rule, you could just leave those aircraft there. And in fact, you could move these aircraft that you took Rome out with. You could move those there if you wanted as well, right? So you'd have to ask yourself, well, is that a good idea though? Like, how much do I have left there? Can the Germans take me out? Do I need those aircraft somewhere else for defense? You know, you have to ask yourself all these questions. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's a good idea. In this case, in looking at the board, I would think that leaving the medium bomber there is a good idea. But if there was a strategic bomber around, I might want to move my fighter back to Paris here so that I could use him as an interceptor. Because he's only going one space and he started at an airbase, right? So he's got lots of movement capacity left. The medium bomber came from Paris. This might have come from Paris too, I'm not sure. But he's still got lots of room left. Now these guys here in Rome can only go 2 spaces because they flew up from northern Algeria. So they can go 2 spaces. So they could land at that air base, or they could go 1, 2 to here, and Rome 1. Yeah, like we could go to the front lines here, or we could go here. I think I'd choose to go over here, keep him safe. And then I was already moving these guys around. These guys were like this before. Okay, so then on our non-combat move, I actually made this video once earlier and it didn't turn out too well. I screwed up in the middle. So anyway, then the rest of our non-combat movement, like we couldn't move any of these guys here that are in Italy because they have already moved on combat movement. But none of these guys down here have moved. What we really want to do is shore up our lines here against the Germans. So let's move this guy up here, and we'll move this guy up here, and we'll move this guy along the rail line. Normally he can go 1, but he can move along the rail line and go more than 1 space, right? So we're going to move him there. The only other thing we could possibly move for the French is this destroyer down here. It would be able to go 4 spaces because it's at a naval shipyard. 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, let's just put him down here. Let's put him down there in the Mediterranean. We can move him all the way down there. Okay, so that's France there, and flying these planes back, we did a strategic bombing raid on on Japan. We used the Russians. So the fight, and they came from an air base as well. They came from this air base over here. So the fighters can go 3 spaces, and there aren't too many safe places for them to go except for back to that one place where they came from. So let's just fly the fighters back there. And then with the bombers, they can go further. And we ask ourselves, are we going to keep bombing the Russians? Or are we going to get our try to get our bombers back over here. Like, do we need them in the fight against Germany? Because if that's the case, we might as well go further than that, right? So we've gone 2 spaces. We go 3, 4 to here, 5, 6, and we can go 7 with them, right? So we could go 7 to here. But if we think that we're exposed there, then we could also land them over here. Like these Japanese planes are leaving here. This is a Russian space here. So there's lots of units here to protect us. So let's go up there with our bombers just to protect them. And then on the next turn, we can fly them as far as we can over that way. And then the next turn after that, they'll be in the fight. And then we've got this medium. Let's keep the medium bomber over here with the fighters. And now over here, these guys were on a carpet bombing mission. And they've gone 2 spaces. They came from over here. So the fighter can only go 2 more spaces. So the only spaces that he could land here, here, or here. Let's just land him right here. Now, the bomber itself is, they don't fight very well on defense, right? So rather than putting him here, he can go 4 more spaces. We'll go 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll land him over there where there's more guys down there. It's important that you don't just land at a friendly spot, but you land at a spot where you're not going to lose that asset in the game. Okay, so I think that's just about everybody that we moved that can move. Oh, there's a French guy down there, and there's a French boat down there. We could move those if we wanted to, if we were taking the French turn. Now I moved these Russian things here, and I moved the Japanese things. That's not all part of the same turn. Like if you're the French player, then it's the French player's non-combat move. I'm just moving the units that I moved during combat movement, and I was using different types of units to demonstrate the rules, and so that's why it looked like I was moving a whole bunch of different nations units on the same turn. It wasn't actually the same turn. It's just the same phase of the turn that I'm demonstrating. So then we get into let's just finish talking about air movement. I'll read you what it says in the rules. It says air units may move their normal movement allowance. Air units that move during combat must use the remaining movement points to return to a friendly land zone or carrier. So we did both of those. We landed on a carrier and a zone, friendly land zone. And it says it might not land in a zone that was conquered this turn, except for if you're playing that optional rule that we looked at. And also a unit returning from combat air patrol must use its patrol movement to land. So we never looked at that. So on the UK combat movement turn, he moved out here and he went on combat air patrol, right? Now, if you wanted to, you could move him, but you couldn't. He only went 1 space. That doesn't mean you can move him 3 spaces or 4 spaces because you're in an air base. He still only has a range of 1. So the only place he could possibly land is right here, if you wanted to. But I think we should keep him out there, just because there's German subs in the water. So let's just keep him out there. That's optional. You don't have to land the guys that are on combat air patrol. So let's get into rail movement, and this is really cool. If you're used to playing Axis and Allies like I am, one of the things that I found fascinating about this game was how it changed the dynamic, how having that rail movement changed the dynamic. And what I also liked was that it wasn't unlimited rail movement. Like you couldn't just move everything you had anywhere you wanted. There was a limit to what you could do, right? So it says here, land and air units may non-combat move along rail lines. A coastal sub may be railed if it starts and ends its movement adjacent to a friendly naval base, submarine base, or shipyard, and must end its move in a sea zone adjacent to a land zone. And then it says, no naval base is required at the end of the move, which is kind of weird because it already said it was. So what it's saying is that, like here's a coastal sub, and this, like let's say that Germany owns all this. You could start at this naval base down here, or a shipyard, and you could move it along the rails, as long as you own all these rails here, and you could move all the way up to here. or vice versa. You could go all the way down to here. As long as you owned all the railways along there, you can move him all the way down there. And normally these things only move one space, so that's pretty good. But only coastal subs you can do that with. You can't do that with a regular sub. Um, but normally what you use in railways for is land units. Like you'll hardly ever use it for one of those things. You mostly use it for land units. And what I found really neat was that over here in Europe, like the fight that I had going on in the Eastern Front was over here. It was just a space or two in Russia. So the Russian factories are already there, but the German factories were way back here, right? But the cool thing was that I could have my units that only go one space, like artillery and infantry. I could get them on the rails and I could move them all the way up here. And then on the factory that was, there should be a factory right here. It got moved around, I guess. I've been doing a lot of moving and stuff. So there's a factory right here. I'd move a guy 2 spaces and then 2 more spaces, and that'd be a tank or a mechanized infantry or something like that. And then there's a factory here. So you could move your stuff as long as you just kept moving them. You just kept recycling them. Then you had constantly had units arriving on the front lines. And if you didn't have that rail movement, then it would take you a lot longer in the game to get one guy moving up, one guy moving up, one guy moving up, one guy moving up, one guy moving up. You know what I mean? But in this way, you can get guys moving all the way up. And what you can do as far as capacity in Europe, so not Russia, like say it would stop at the Russian border here, but all these multicolored territories here that you see in the continent of Europe here, the rail capacity is 4. So you can move 4 units along the railway all the way up to the Russian border or anywhere in Europe, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of unit it is. It could be a tank, it could be an infantry, it could be whatever. You could move them, 4 of them. And then once you got into Russia, then you could only move 2 units. So the rail capacity in Russia is 2. So you could move 4 units up to the border, and then 2 units could keep going and move into Russia. Or you could use 2 different units that were already up there. You don't have to use the same units, but basically you could move. You could put a unit on in Paris here if you had taken over Paris, and you could move them all the way up here or all the way over here, depending on how far you made it into Russia, right? That's a long ways to make it into Russia back there, though, so it's unlikely you're going to get that far. Anyway, Europe is the only one that has a rail capacity of 4, whereas Russia has a capacity of 2. The British Isles and Japan and North America also have a capacity of 2. But the British Isles and Japan are only 3 territories, so here, here, and here. So basically what that means is that you could move a dude or an artillery down to here, right? From Scotland to London, or from London to Scotland. In the States, that's a little better. Like you've got factories on the east and west coast, you could rail 2 things across from one coast to the other. That could be helpful in a game. And then again with Japan, it's like it's like the UK over there. There's 3 territories here, so you can move one all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top. 2 units, and then everywhere else on the board. So we've got 4 in Europe, 2 in those places I just showed you. And then everywhere else on the board, like Asia here, all over Asia, the Middle East, Africa down there, the rail capacity is only 1. So you can only move 1 space. And I guess that would include down there, wouldn't it? It's like, oh yeah, there's railways down there. So the capacity would be 1 down there. And that's it. Yeah, because there's no railways on islands or anything. You could get on the railway and you could go in circles. So, let me just take a look here. Yeah, and you can use the railway if you want it, or you can use it if somebody in your alliance allows you to use it. What you couldn't do is lend your capacity to somebody else. Like, say you're the Italians and they've got a rail movement of 4 as well. You couldn't give that rail capacity to Germany so that Germany could move 8 units. You just can't do that. The capacity is only for your units. It's not for anybody in your alliance's units. But you could use their railway, though. They'll let you use their railway if they're on the same side as you. And I could see instances where perhaps the Russians might allow an allied unit, or who knows, maybe even an Axis unit, to use their railway, or vice versa. You know, like because it's a three-sided game, I could see it happening every once in a while where you're allowed to use somebody else's railway, or not. You know, like they may or may not allow you to. I don't ever see France telling the UK that they can't use the railway, though. Like if you're aligned to them, right? So anyway, I don't think there's much more to tell you. Just remember that in this game, you can't move your units into a space that you conquered that turn unless you're using that optional rule, and then it's limited even when you do that. And railways, learn how to use your railways, because they're really going to help you in this game. If you can't use your railways effectively in this game, then you're not going to win it, because your opponent might be really good at using the railways, and they're going to kick your ass quickly. And that's about it. This is a short video, so take care, everyone. General Hand Grenade out.